Chapter 13, Close Call. I had 3 sessions with Dr. Southerby the following week. He was happy to see I was following his advice and filling in my journal with thoughts and feelings. He spent the first 10 minutes reading them, then asking me questions about the things I'd written, never insisting I tried to answer if I showed any reluctance. I performed my sign language so spontaneously and gracefully, he joked about my having once been deaf. Then he grew serious and returned to the idea that I talked to someone who was deaf on a daily basis. "That seems logical, doesn't it, Laura?" he asked. I nodded, even though I felt I'd rather not answer. He had a way of holding his kind eyes on me firmly, but not with intimidation. I felt so captured by that gaze, a gaze that filled with sincerity and compassion, that I could barely turn away. His eyes were mesmerizing. In fact, during our 3rd session, he decided he would try hypnosis. I had no idea if he learned anything. One moment I was staring ahead, and the next I was blinking and wondering how long I'd been in his office. Did he get me to speak under hypnosis? If he did, he didn't mention it afterward. "It's very good that you feel less and less anxious, Laura, especially about being here," he explained, after I agreed to be hypnotized. "Trust is essential if we're going to make any progress with your problems." I smiled and nodded. I did trust him more and more, and I even looked forward to our sessions. Some of the others, especially Megan, thought that was strange. "It's like enjoying someone putting your fingers through your skull and feeling around your brain," she said, after she'd asked me a little bit about our session, and I saw she was happy talking and listening to Dr. Southerby. When she heard I had permitted him to do hypnosis on me, she went bonkers. "Are you crazy? When you're off like that, you have no idea what he's doing to you. Maybe he took your clothes off," she suggested. I started to laugh, and her face crumpled, not with anger, but with sadness. I tried to sign an explanation and tried to tell her how good Dr. Southerby was and how he would never do something like that, but the tears were filling her eyes quickly. "I thought you were different. I thought you believed me and understood. Everyone else laughs at me." I shook my head. "I'm not laughing at you," I signed. However, the tears were already streaming down her cheeks. She had her hands clenched into tiny fists, and for a moment I was afraid she might hit me. "You mark my words," she flared. "You'll be sorry you didn't listen to me someday. You will," she concluded, her voice strong and hateful, as if she were pronouncing my death. Then she marched away, her body straight, her arms extended and stiffly swinging like a toy soldier. Lately, she was doing more and more of that, leaving us all and going off by herself, closing her door in her room or wandering around outside, avoiding people. My own periods of depression, my feelings of nervousness had diminished, but not the inner voice and the flashbacks. Dr. Southerby made me think as much as I could about those I had described in my journal. He probed my mind. His suggestions and questions resembled a scalpel in hands of a skilled and graceful surgeon, knowing just when to push forward and when to pull back. If something became too sensitive, my lips would begin to tremble. In fact, my whole body would start to shake, and my heart would pound so hard and fast I had trouble breathing. He would stop, touch my shoulder, and ask me to close my eyes and take deeper breaths. Then he would change the subject, and soon I would relax again. During our 4th session, he had Miss Dungan bring in the needlework I had completed. And we talked about the picture. Why was I attracted to it? And what did I think about when I did it? Most of my free time was spent in the arts and crafts studio now. During my 2nd visit there, I went from sculpture to needlework. That day, I saw another patient sewing quietly in the corner, and I walked over and watched her for a while. My fingers felt as if they were doing the work along with her. Mrs. Dogan noticed my interest and suggested I try it. In minutes, I was doing it comfortably. From the way you're at it, Miss Duncan said as she nodded gently, I would safely say that you've done this many times before. I guess your fingers don't have amnesia, she said, smiling. She let me choose my own picture, and I selected one of a little girl playing on the beach. As I filled her legs and her dress and her face, the little girl became clearer and clearer in my mind. Flashes of her smile, her eyes, even the sound of her voice popping in and out of my memory. It was someone I knew and loved very much, but who? Her name was on the tip of my tongue. Her voice tingled inside my head. All I had to do was think harder. Yet every time I started to open one of the secret doors holding the truths about my past, I found it locked up tight. Something in me knew that soon I would remember one thing clearly, and it would all come tumbling out of the remaining dark places in my mind, and with it one terrible, terrible memory. Sometimes the effort literally took my breath away, and I had to stop and close my eyes and wait for the trembling and pain in my heart to pass. This is not normal, Dr. Sotheby told me when he saw how distressed I was after he read about this in my journal. This tug of war inside you, Laura. And one day soon, the side of you that wants you to return to the world will win, and it will be over, I promise, he said. He made me feel good, and he gave me hope. I discussed most of this with Lawrence, who had been there waiting for me after every single one of my sessions. He pretended he had just happened to be in the corridor on his way to the library or the rec room. I knew he was pretending, but I didn't mind. I enjoyed teaching him more sign language and then using what I taught him to explain and discuss things with him. Maybe the whole world should use sign language, Laura, he told me one afternoon. When you have to draw a visual idea of your thoughts, you think about it more and don't say as many stupid, cruel things, he said. I guess from the way he lowered his eyes and then looked away, so I couldn't see the hurt on his face, that he was really talking about his parents. Only his mother had visited him the last time, and when I asked about it, he said his father had to go on a business trip. It's harder to lie to people through sign language, he continued. It's a greater commitment because it involves more of yourself. Afterward, it's more difficult to tell people, I didn't say that, or that's not what I meant. He turned to me and sighed deeply, smiling through his fog of depression. Maybe you're lucky not having anyone visit you, he said. That way, no one close to you can lie to you. I started to shake my head. We've always lied to each other in my family, he said bitterly. My mother always says it's better to tell a little white lies to avoid unpleasantness. The thing is, everyone knows everyone else is not telling the truth. But we all have to make believe we don't. It's like we tiptoe on thin ice. All I had to do the last time is say, I know you're lying, Mom. Dad's not away on a trip. He just wouldn't come this time. He can't stand coming here. Every time he comes, he wears this sour face and gazes around disgustedly. I know what he's thinking. He's thinking, what's he doing here? What's a son of his doing here? I don't want to be here either, Lawrence protested. I don't like being thought of this way. I lost all my friends on the outside. How am I ever going to go back out there? What am I supposed to say to people when they ask me where I've been? Most of them know anyway and will just treat me like some sort of leper. He dropped his head and didn't raise it until I reached to touch his cheek. Then he smiled again. Now that you're here, I guess I don't mind that much, he said. At least you listen to me and I'm not afraid to talk to you. That's because I don't talk, I just sign, so you can get your words in faster, I signed, and he laughed. Then he stopped abruptly. I don't laugh with anyone else, he told me, really, not even with my parents. Especially not with my parents, he added. You're a special person, Laura, I know you are. That's why I made myself concentrate and learn as much as I could about sign language. If that's the way you're going to communicate for the rest of your life, I'll be here to understand and talk to you for the rest of mine, he pledged. The softness in his eyes reminded me of someone else's eyes. Even the sound of his voice, even more than vaguely familiar. If I closed my eyes and listened to him talk, I almost fell back through the darkness toward the light. I told Dr. Sotheby about Lawrence, about our little talks, when he asked me if I had made any friends. I asked him about Megan and Mary Beth and Lulu. He didn't go into detail, but he just said they all had serious problems too. He assured me that everyone would get better in time if they truly made the effort. You've got to want to help yourself, that's the key, he lectured. I knew he meant it as much for me as anyone else in the clinic. I told Lawrence that and he nodded. I admit I don't want to help myself as much as I should yet, he said. Not yet, but he added quickly, the day you walk out of here, I'll work hard at following you. Is that a promise? I inquired. He nodded, and I was so happy for him that I leaned forward on the bench and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. His eyes nearly exploded. He raised his hand slowly to touch the place where my lips touched him, as if to confirm it had been there. From that day forward, Lawrence looked at me differently. His eyes would linger on my face longer. He wasn't afraid to be caught staring at me, and if I did catch him, he simply smiled. Most important, he stopped shaking whenever he was with me. I saw that he was growing stronger in small ways, eating better, participating more in recreational activities, and talking more to others. One visitor's day, he appeared abruptly in the art studio. Megan, Lulu, and I were the only ones in there. Once again, Megan's mother hadn't appeared, and Lulu's mother had written to say that she had an important legal obligation. Megan told her it probably had to do with finding another lover. She'd rather be with him than with you in this nut house, Megan said. I wish she hadn't said such a thing. Whenever Lulu had trouble with her family, she acted even younger, behaving like a baby, crying and suckling until she had to be taken to her room. The moment I saw Lawrence in the doorway, I knew something dramatic and serious had happened. His face was flushed, but he stood firm, his eyes full of excitement. He hurried across the studio to me. I looked up from my needlepoint, a small quizzical smile on his face. I did it, he bragged, and strutted to the window. He looked out at the garden and at the other patients and their families and turned back to me. I burst the bubble today. I risked falling through the ice. He turned. I held my smile. She came with him again. This time it was supposedly because of some major company problem. It's Sunday, he cried, raising his voice and his arms. How can there be a major company problem? I told her she was lying for him and that she couldn't deny it. The commotion caught Megan's attention and she left her mold of clay and approached, her tools still in her hand. What's going on? She demanded. Lawrence turned and looked at her and then at me. Nothing, he said quickly. She stared at him and then at me and then looked at him again. Oh, I see, she said. Secrets. You two have secrets now, she said, smirking. Then her face filled with fury, her eyes blazing madly, her lips thinning. So keep your stupid secrets. See if I care. See if anyone cares. That's right, Lawrence said suddenly, surprising me and not backing down as usual. We do have secrets, so mind your own business, okay? Megan's mouth dropped and she looked at me. I tried smiling at her, but she narrowed her eyes and shook her head. There was no retreat in her. A strange smile twisted her lips. You two have done it, haven't you? She asked, stepping toward him. What? He shifted his eyes to me, then to her, stepping back as she stepped forward. You've done it, haven't you, Lawrence? She asked, disdainfully, her smile sharper. You and Miss Laura Perfect have joined at the waist. What? No, Lawrence said, shaking his head more vigorously. Sure you have, she pounced. Where do you do it? In your room? In hers? In the grass? Where? Megan screamed. What's going on over there? Miss Duggan said, looking from across the room. She had been helping another patient with his finger painting so intensely she hadn't noticed what was happening in the corner of the room. She hadn't even seen Lawrence enter the studio. He looked away anxiously, his eyes full of panic. Well, go ahead, Lawrence. Tell Miss Duggan what's going on. Tell her where you two did it, Megan challenged. Lawrence grew more terrified. He seemed unable to move. It was as if his feet were nailed to the floor. I started to sign to him, but he was beginning to tremble harder and faster. Megan laughed. Miss Duncan rose and started towards us. Lawrence looked at me helplessly. I'll tell her myself, Megan said. I'll tell her what you two have been doing. I'll tell everyone. She started to turn towards Miss Dugan. Lawrence rushed at Megan. I raised my arms and managed a guttural noise, but it was too late. He grabbed Megan around the neck. Miss Duggan screamed and he pulled Megan back. Her face turned crimson and she stuck her carving tool into Lawrence's wrist, but he didn't relinquish his grip until Mrs. Duggan grabbed his arm and I rose to push him away from Megan. Then he charged out of the art studio. He's bleeding, I signed at Mrs. Duncan. I know, Megan. Are you all right? She was leaning against the table, gasping for breath and coughing and rubbing her neck. Yes, I'm all right, she managed. Then she blinked hard, as if she were trying to get something out of her eyes, before turning back to Miss Duncan. You saw it, she said. He tried to rape me. What? I shook my head when Miss Duncan looked over to me. He tried to rape me. All of a sudden, he was at me, and if I didn't fight him off, she looked at me. He raped you, too, didn't he? Tell her. He came into your room one night, she continued, her eyes widening with elaboration, and put his hand over your mouth, and I shook my head more vigorously. No, I sighed. Megan stopped, the tears rolling down her cheeks, and she took a deep, painful breath. Why don't you people believe me? She asked tearfully. Maybe you should go to the infirmary, Megan, Miss Duncan said softly. She stepped up to her and put her arm around Megan's waist. Come along. Let's let Miss Cohen check you over. I'm all right, Megan insisted, pulling away abruptly. I fought him off. He didn't do anything, but he could have, she added quickly. She fixed her wild, angry eyes on me. You weren't much help, she told me. Then she spun around and returned to her clay as if nothing happened. Miss Duncan and I watched her for a moment. She was humming and working more vigorously at her clay. I have to see about Lawrence, Miss Duncan said. Are you all right? Fine, I signed, but I was worried about Lawrence. I'll see about him, she said and went to her intercom. Lawrence frightened himself more than anyone else. The attendants found him down by the ocean, sitting on a rock. He had walked through to the water, soaking to his shoes and socks and pants, and hugging his knees. His head was down when they located him. He was shaking so badly from his panic and chill from the ocean water, he had to be taken to the infirmary. Later, I found out his hands were clenched in fists so tightly he nearly stopped the blood circulation to his fingers, and he dug his fingernails into the skin until his palms bled. He had to be put on tranquilizers. They called his parents, but neither his mother nor father visited. I was worried about him. I didn't think much about myself for these past few days, and my session with Dr. Sotheby didn't go as well as usual. A week later, Lawrence was released from the infirmary. In the meantime, Megan behaved as if nothing at all had happened. She hadn't told a soul about the incident and never brought it up with me. She often abruptly went from being as mute as me to talking incessantly about everything and everyone, mainly at the dinner table. Lulu and Mary Beth inquired after Lawrence and were simply told that he wasn't feeling well. In his place, everyone accepted that as enough and didn't follow up with more persistent inquiries. As if she felt she had to direct her slings and arrows at someone new, Megan narrowed in on a different patient. She would complain about the way they ate, or talked, or moped about. She seemed to know everyone else's problems and always laid the blame on his or her father. She was so cruel to Lulu at times. When it came to Lulu's father, I had to interfere, pulling Lulu's attention away and teaching her sign language. "Why don't you just stop this already?" Megan fired at me. "You were talking when you came here. It's just an act to get them all to feel sorry for you." "Oh," she said suddenly, her eyes shifting away from me. "Look who's better." Everyone turned to see Lawrence enter the cafeteria. He looked like his old self. Unfortunately, that meant once again he was unsure, timid, and eyes downcast. He avoided looking our way and walked directly to the food line, stepping back with another patient, and reached for a second dessert. He didn't come to our table after he got his food either. Instead, he sat at the first table available, one at which two younger boys ate, neither showing any interest in him, nor anyone else for that matter. "Why doesn't Lawrence sit with us?" Mary Beth asked. "He's probably too ashamed of himself," Megan said. "He peed in his pants," she whispered to Lulu, "just as you do sometimes. Did you know that Lulu has to wear diapers every once in a while?" "Stop it," I shouted empathetically with my hands as I stood up. "What's the matter with you, Laura Perfect?" Megan tensed. "You never wore diapers?" I marched away from the table to join Lawrence. He looked up with a surprise as I sat beside him. I smiled and asked him how he was. "I'm okay," he said softly, dropping his eyes. "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you." I forced him to look at me and told him I wasn't embarrassed. Megan was the one who should be embarrassed. Now she was pretending it never happened. He shot a quick look her way. She was glaring at us. "You don't have to worry about her," I continued. "She doesn't want anyone to talk about it. It's almost as if she suddenly came down with a case of amnesia." He looked a little relieved, but I noticed how peaked and tired he was. Later I learned that was probably an effort of the medication he'd been given. It took the better part of another full day before he regained some of the newfound courage and outgoingness. He joined us in the rec room after lunch the next day and watched me play a game of checkers with Mary Beth. Megan was in one of her mute moods again today. She barely uttered a word, and when Lawrence sat down beside me, she looked away and then started singing under her breath. After a while, we all turned to her. She was staring out the window, and we heard, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder where you are, up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky." She turned when she realized we were all staring at her. My daddy used to come into my room and sing that to me and tell me to look up at the ceiling and the stars would appear. So I looked up while tears rolled out of her eyes. "I hate secrets," she said, staring at Lawrence. "I hate having to keep secrets." She got up and walked out quickly. "What's with her?" Mary Beth said. I shook my head and looked at Lawrence, who gazed after her and then back at me, his face full of sadness and pity. I smiled at him. He didn't hate her for what she had done to him. He truly felt sorry for her. Megan didn't appear for the rest of the afternoon. At dinner, we all got our food and sat, but she didn't come to the cafeteria. Billy and the attendant approached our table suspiciously. "Where's Queen Megan?" he demanded. "She knows what it means if you don't show up for dinner," he said pointedly, directing himself at Mary Beth, who quickly looked down at her lap. "She said she'd be right along," Lawrence told him firmly. Billy raised his eyebrows. "What are you, her lawyer?" Lawrence turned crimson. Billy laughed and returned to his position, but he kept looking at our table and at the door. "I'm gonna go get her," I signed to Lawrence and rose. I left the cafeteria and hurried up the corridor to the residential wing. Megan's door was closed. I knocked and waited, then knocked again. We weren't able to lock our doors from the inside, so I knew I could enter her room, but she wasn't exactly the type of person who would forgive you for barging in. But I wanted to warn her about Billy, so I opened this door slightly and peeked in. At first I thought she was gone. She wasn't sitting in the chair or lying on the bed, but I heard what sounded like water running in the sink, so I entered the room and I knocked again on the door to get her attention. She didn't appear. I walked slowly to the bathroom and gazed in. There she was, sitting on the closed toilet cover, her arms over the edge of the sink. I stepped forward and looked. Her wrists were under a sink full of ruby red water, so dark it looked like she had cut off her hands. She gazed up at me, her eyes with tears, her cheeks streaked, and she smiled. "Hi, Daddy," she said, and then she began to sing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." I felt my throat close and open as the shock that I saw hit me. I ran to the door, gasping for breath, and I tried to summon up my long-lost voice. "Help! Help! Help!" I screamed, finding my voice. "Help! Help! Help!" Two male attendants and Miss Kletchner came running down the hall. "What is it? Why are you shouting?" "Megan," I cried, and I pointed. "She's trying to kill herself." They sped past me, and I fell back against the wall, sliding down slowly till I crouched on the baseboard. The commotion drew some of the staff from the cafeteria, and Lawrence and Mary Beth came out too. Lawrence saw me sitting on the corridor floor and came hurrying over. "What happened?" he asked. "Megan tried to commit suicide," I said gravely. He looked down the hall at the staff around her room. Then he looked back at me. "You've got your voice back," he said. I nodded. Sometimes miracles happen in the strangest times. Thankfully, I had found Megan in time. She needed only a day in the infirmary. However, they took her upstairs afterward, instead of permitting her to return to her room and to us. We all felt terrible for her. "She's probably heavily sedated," Lawrence said. "When she comes out of it and realizes she's in the tower, she'll get even more depressed," Mary Beth said. "You know how she feels about the tower." "Maybe she won't be up there that long," Lulu said hopefully. Despite the way May had often treated her, Lulu really liked and needed Megan. "You know, when someone goes up there, they usually don't come down," Mary Beth reminded her. Lulu started to cry and rock in her chair. I reached over and took her hand in mine. "Maybe it'll be different for Megan," I said, and I stroked her hand. Lulu smiled and nodded. "Why give her false hope?" Mary Beth insisted. "What do you mean?" I asked. "They can't keep her up there forever. If they can't make any progress with you upstairs, sometimes they just move you someplace else," Lawrence said. "Someplace where they can handle only serious cases, not the rich person's country club clinic like this." "Oh." I'm glad you found your voice, he said, smiling. It's really nice to hear you talk again. Yes, Mary Beth said. I noticed that she looked a lot healthier, like she's gained a couple pounds since we had first arrived. Lawrence told me that she made significant progress, and she finally admitted that she wasn't overweight. The end of her ordeal was in sight. I felt bad for Megan. Despite her bouts of nastiness, I missed her. I told Lawrence how I felt when he went for a walk after my work in the art therapy. Lulu trailed along with us. She seemed to be the most lost without Megan, who in her strange fashion had defended and looked after Lulu as much as she ridiculed her. Poor Lulu, maybe she shouldn't call her that anymore, he laughed. I think it's gotten so she wouldn't answer if someone called her Edith, he said. I'm gonna start doing that. She's never gonna get better if we don't help her face reality. You're right, Lawrence said. Here you are worrying about everyone else's problem but your own. You once told me that helping others helps you too. Yes, he said, smiling, I did. But that was more of an excuse to get you to let me get involved with you more. You didn't need an excuse for that, Lawrence, I said, and his smile widened. We sat at our favorite stone bench, the one that had become the symbol of the boundary for me, because beyond it, to the hill that led to the view of the ocean, that put ice in my veins. Lulu walked around us, occupying herself with wildflowers. I'm looking for a 4-leaf clover, she said. My daddy told me it'd bring good luck, if I had one. I'll give it to him when he comes to visit. Why doesn't her father ever visit? I asked. I thought you knew, he said. I shook my head. I know her parents got a divorce, at least that's what Megan said. Yes, but not after that. Not long after that, her father was killed in an accident. Lulu won't believe it. She never went to the funeral. Megan never said. Megan can be cruel, but not that cruel, at least to Lulu, Lawrence said. Maybe she didn't want it to be true. She seems to hate all men, especially all fathers, but I think she really wants to love one, to have a real father. We all know what her father did to her. He put her here, just like my father put me here, he added angrily. Who put me here, I wondered aloud. You know so much about everyone else, Lawrence. Why don't you know anything about me? Nothing more than what you've told me, which isn't much, he said, smiling. Everyone's asked about you, but it's like you're a top secret patient. A nurse brought you here one night, and that's it. Yes, I said, that's it. I stood up. Going back? No, I said firmly. Going ahead? I started toward the crest of the hill and then paused. Lawrence came up beside me and took my hand. I'm going to confront my demons, Lawrence. Determined, I took another step forward. I'm going to do it. I'll go with you, Laura. Let me help you. I took a deep breath and nodded. Then I took another step and another until we were going down the hill. Lulu remained at the crest, watching us. We walked slowly until we rounded the turn in the path and the ocean came into view. It was as if someone had knocked the wind out of me, and I closed my eyes and struggled to take slow, deep breaths. Lawrence squeezed my hand. I'm right here, he whispered. I opened my eyes and we walked ahead. The waves became more vivid, the spray splashing off the rocks, the breeze harder and faster. Seagulls screamed through the sky and swooped down to feed. The sense of seaweed and salt air made my head swim. The ocean roar grew louder, stronger. I paused and closed my eyes again. The darkness filled like a curtain, and I saw a young man, tan and strong, standing shirtless on the deck of a boat. He had eyes like mine and a nose and mouth that were so similarly shaped. He was waving, beckoning. I looked down. There was a small hand clasped to my own. The girl was no taller than Lulu, smiling. Laura. Was that Lawrence or the boy on the boat calling me? I released my grip on the little girl's hand and she started to sign. She's deaf, I cried. Who? Lawrence asked. I opened my eyes. We were close enough to the rocks and the sea so that the spray reached our faces. I turned to him, my heart thumping. I have a little sister who's deaf, I said. I have a brother who is, what? My twin, I declared, and I turned away to run up the hill. I dug into the ground with my feet so hard my legs ached, but I charged up, terrified by the rush of the memory. Lawrence called to me, but I didn't turn back. Instead, I kept running, passing Lulu, who looked surprised and confused, and then down the walkway and back toward the clinic. I burst through the door and charged madly down the corridor, nearly knocking over the janitor. Sorry, I cried and ran to Dr. Sotheby's office. Miss Clinchner was coming out of the staff quarters. She shouted and stepped in my path, holding my arms out so she could stop me. What's wrong? Why are you running through the building, knocking into people? I've got to see Dr. Sotheby right away, I said. You don't just go burst into his office, young lady. There's other patients here. You wait for your appointment, she said. No, I have to see him. You don't understand. I have a little sister who's deaf. That's why I know how to sign. And I have a brother. That's wonderful, she said. Congratulations. Now turn around and get yourself cleaned up for dinner. You look like a wild woman. You'll frighten the other patients half to death. But I have to see him now. If you don't listen to me, I'll have you confined to your room, or worse, she threatened. I don't condone wild behavior here, no matter what's wrong with a patient. Those who can't follow the rules are placed elsewhere. I stepped away from her. No, this isn't, although I know what it would be like to be, I said defiantly. Well, we shouldn't be treated like criminals just because we have mental problems. We're people who have difficulties in their life, serious difficulties. I know, she said dryly. Having too much can become a problem. Where do you put everything? How do you handle all the special privileges? Very serious difficulties, she said with a sardonic smile. Why are you working here? I asked, shaking my head. You don't care about the patients. You have no respect for us. You should be working in a prison hospital. That's where you belong, I fumed. Really? How come all your blue bloods know what's good for everyone else but yourselves? Spare me the career guidance and behave yourself. I straightened up and inserted my spine and fixed my eyes on hers. I want to make an appointment with Dr. Sotheby, I insisted. Can I do that at least? I'll make the arrangements for you, she said. Go on and get ready for dinner. You look a mess. I hesitated a moment, debating. She looked like she was made of stone, and if I tried to move her, I would only anger her and delay my visit with Dr. Sotheby. I have to see him as soon as possible, I said, and then turned and walked toward my room. Lawrence and Lulu came up and were looking for me. Are you all right? Lawrence asked when he caught up with me outside my room. Yes, I just had a real memory and I wanted to share it with Dr. Sotheby, but Miss Clinchner stopped me and told me I had to get ready for dinner. She said she'd make an appointment for me. That's good, Lawrence said. I'm happy for you, Laura. This might be the beginning of the end of your time here, he said. Maybe, I said, and I went to my room. I was too frustrated and furious to appreciate my progress at the moment. However, when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw that Miss Clinchner was right about one thing. I did look wild. My hair looked like I run my fingers through it for hours, and my face was flushed, and my eyes were bright with excitement. I decided to shower and change for dinner. I was putting on my shoes and going to brush out my hair when Miss Clinchner appeared in my doorway. I made your appointment, she said, tomorrow at 10. Thank you, I said. Go to room 109 in the morning, she added, and started to leave. 101? But that's not Dr. Sotheby's office, I cried. Why do I have to go there? She turned back to me slowly. Your case has been transferred to Dr. Scallion, she said, not without some pleasure. But I don't want to be transferred. I want to talk to Dr. Sotheby, I said. My heart was racing. Why would I be transferred now? She sighed and rolled her eyes toward the ceiling. I want. Don't you people have any other words in your vocabulary? It's not important what you want. What you need is to decide by people in charge here, she said. Your transfer to Dr. Scallion has been decided, and that's that, she added, her words hammering into my brain. I won't talk to anyone else but Dr. Sotheby, I insisted just as firmly. I faced her with all defiance that I could muster. She stared at me a moment, then stepped toward me with a cold smile on her face. If you refuse your therapy, you'll be transferred upstairs. And if we can't help you upstairs, you'll be transferred to a different sort of institution. The one that suits your needs better, she says. Believe me, that's what will happen. And she started to turn away. But Dr. Sotheby is helping me, I moaned. How could I fight such raw power over me? Dr. Scallion is just as good. In fact, he's Dr. Sotheby's superior. You should be grateful you've been given the opportunity, that he's made time for you. But being grateful things is not in the character of most of the patients here. Why should you be any different, she added. Don't be late for dinner, she warned. She left me staring after her, wondering what I had done to deserve to be transferred to Dr. Scallion. After all, getting my memory back wasn't something to be punished for, was it?